yes, we have begun. Right now we're dealing with understanding two things you're going to need to know for the conic sections. You need to know how to find midpoints and distances between 2 points. Okay, this is basic stuff. You should know it, but when you're dealing with variables, sometimes people get confused. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go over problem 8 that deals with variables.
On that paper.
Well, hurry up and catch up. You find the paper? Good. All right. So what I'd like you guys to do right now is I'd like you to label W minus 2 as your x1. This W is x2. This one as your y1. And this one as your y2. Now, we're going to use the distance formula. If you want to find the distance between these, what you have to do is you have to carefully plug things in to this formula. And then I'm going to show you a logical way to do it as well. You can choose to do it the formula way or the logical way. All right, I'm going to put a minus sign. Put a minus sign, put the big old square root. Put a blue, magenta, minus sign. Okay. Now that you have everything labeled accordingly as planned, what am I going to plug in right here? I'm going to plug in my second x value. What is my second x value? W. Okay. What is my first x value? So notice what I'm going to actually have to do right here is I'm going to open up a parentheses. I'm going to put W minus a 2 because I have to subtract this whole expression. All right. So I put a small little parentheses around that binomial W minus 2. My y2 value is 4W. My y1 value is a W. Okay? So see what we have here. Make it a little bit bigger for you to see. Okay? In the first parentheses, I have a W. Now if I distribute this negative to both numbers, I have a minus W and a plus 2, and that's being squared. Over here, I have a 4W minus a W that gives me 3W, and I have to square it. What's going to happen to these W's? They're going to cancel out. We're left with 2 squared. Over here we have 3W that's being squared. 2 squared is 4. 3W that's being squared will give you 9W squared. And this is where students sometimes make a mistake. They think that they can somehow simplify this, all right, because they know the square root of 4 is 2 and the square root of 9 is 3 and the square root of W squared is W. So they try to bring stuff out, but you can't because of this addition sign here. Your final answer is 4 plus 9W squared inside of the radical. That's what the distance is equal to. So your distance is equal. Now some people might do this. 9W squared plus 4. That is your final answer for the distance on number 8. You can't simplify that any more than it's been simplified. Now that we found the distance, now we're going to go back here. And we're going to use the same numbers to find the midpoint. Just going to relabel them real quick. Put x1, x2, y1, y2. Now the midpoint is a heck of a lot easier than distance. All right? And the reason we're using variables is we're going to be using a lot of variables when we're dealing with solving for dealing with cones and parabolas and hyperbolas in the conic section. No, not hyperbole.
He told me
hyperbola.
yesterday, he was like, I'm sorry, he's not that
It's one of the conic sections.
one.
All right, so right here, everybody, right now we're working on the midpoint.
Hold on, can you hold on one?
Yes, I'm going to hold on until Adam will be quiet because I'm recording right now.
Shut up.
All right, we need to carefully place in our x values right here and our y coordinates right there. So for x1, what am I going to plug in?
W minus 2.
All right, w minus 2. And what am I going to add to it? Another w. So I'm taking w minus 2, adding another w, and dividing it by 2. And my y values are going to be w plus 4w all over 2. You'll notice right here, oh, wrong color. The blues are here. The magentas are there. Now we have w plus a w and a minus 2, so that becomes 2w minus 2 all divided by 2. All right. W plus 4w becomes a 5w over 2. One of these is finished. One of these, you need to go a little bit further.
I'm so confused on why.
It would, you got 2W.
Oh, okay. So listen, here we go. By the way, I have a w here. I have a w here. A w plus a w is a 2w.
Okay.
And then I just put the minus 2 at the end. Okay? Over here, I have a w and a 4w that gets me to a 5w. All right? Now, 2 goes into 2. So we can act at one time, right? So we can actually divide 2 into this and 2 into that. So we're left with simply w minus 1. That's our x coordinate for our midpoint, is w minus 1. And what are we left with for our y coordinate? 5 times w all divided by 2. This, I'm going to put capital N. This right here refers to the midpoint of number 8. That's the midpoint of number 8. Okay? All right. What we're going to do now is we're going to look over here at the distance. We're going to do it just a logical way to find distance. So what I do in order to do this is I put w minus 2 comma w, put one of the ordered pairs, and right underneath it, I put the other ordered pair. Now, what I want you to understand is when I put an ordered pair over an ordered pair, these values represent my x's, these values represent my y's. Okay? So what I want you guys to understand, technically your distance was taken from the Pythagorean theorem, all right? And distance is going to equal the square root of the change of your x squared plus the change of your y values being squared, like the gap between them. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, except we're dealing with the by the way, this right here, that's delta. That means change in, like the difference between them. So right here, I want you to look carefully. What's the gap between a w and a 4w? What's the difference? 3w. This right here is referred to my change in y. That's what my change in y is right there. What's the gap between a w and a w minus 2? What's the only thing that's different between them? Minus 2. That's the gap between them. That's called the change in x. So notice, what's my change in x? A negative 2. What's my change in y? A 3w. Don't worry, this is just saying a gap. That's not like that. That's just my way of denoting a difference between them. I know it looks like a greater than and less than symbol, but don't think of it that way. All right? So here's my gap. So what I want you to do, change in x, we're going to do the change in x squared plus the change in y squared, and then we're just going to take the square root of it, because that's what the distance is basically going to be equal to every single time. What's the change in x? Negative 2. What's the change in y? 3w. And you get the exact same answer as we did before, which is 4 plus 9w squared. Alright?
That's pretty cool right there.
So, that's just using the logic way. Okay? Just like saying, what's the gap between these numbers? I'm going to square it. What's the gap between my y values? Squared. What's the gap between my x values? Squared. And then take the square root of your answer after you add them together. Okay? This is kind of like a little shortcut if you wanted to do it that way. Alright?